Welcome to Cafe Stories, where every story is a new mystery. Waiting to be solved, grab a coffee. Stay curious and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let's get started, Sherlock Holmes and the Man with Two Faces. Chapter 1. The Phantom of Blackthorn Manor. It was on a dreary November afternoon in the year 1893 that I found myself once more a spectator tune of those singular episodes which so frequently punctuated the career of my remarkable friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. A persistent drizzle had descended upon London, reducing Baker Street to a quagmire of mud and mist, the gas lamps flickering like PID sentinels against the encroaching gloom. Holmes, in one of his restless moods, had been pacing the length of our sitting room, his violin silent. Upon the table his keen mind avid lie starved for stimulation. It was in this atmosphere of stifled energy that our visitor arrived, a man whose appearance and tale would prove as shrouded in mystery as the fog-bound streets below the doorbell's jangle. Startled even Mrs. Hudson, whose tolerance for irregular hours was by now well seasoned moments later. She ushered into our rooms a gentleman whose bearing and attire spoke of aristocracy, though his countenance told a far darker story. Sir Reginald Blackthorn, for so he introduced himself with a stiff bow, was a man in the grip of profound terror. His face, though handsome in a gaunt, angular fashion, bore the pallor of a spectre, his eyes sunken and shadowed as though sleep had long abandoned him. His black frock-coat, though finely tailored, was wrinkled and spattered with mud. His create SKU and his hands, which trembled as he removed his gloves, were those of a man acquainted with recent violence. "Mr. Holmes," he began in a voice horror with strain, "I have come because I'm quite convinced I shall be murdered, or worse, condemned as a murderer unless you intervene. There is another me," he said, his voice trembling with each word. Holmes, who had been regarding our client with the dispassionate scrutiny of a biologist examining a rare specimen, now leaned forward in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "A doppelganger, Sir Reginald," he said, his tone curious yet skeptical. "The notion is ancient, yet seldom substantiated. Pray illuminate." The baronet sank into the prophet armchair, his fingers knotting and unnoted as though wringing the truth from the air. "Itself for 3 months since my return to Blackthorn Manor in Yorkshire, after a decade abroad. There have been occurrences," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Servants swear they see me in corridors. I never walked. Valuables vanish from locked rooms. Livestock are mutilated in the fields. And now," here his voice faltered, his gaze dropping to the Persian rug beneath his boots, which Holmes had been studying with peculiar intensity now. Holmes interjected smoothly, "There has been a death, sir." Reginald flinched as though struck 4 days past my head-stable hand. "A loyal man named Briggs was found in the hayloft with his throat slit," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "The villagers are convinced I did it. They claim to have seen me fleeing the scene yet. I was miles away at the time, consulting my solicitor in York. I confess that I was entirely skeptical and inclined to attribute everything to natural causes, my dear sir. The strain of such accusations alone might conjure phantoms," I said, attempting to offer a rational explanation. "Are you certain these sightings are not merely the product of overwrought nerves?" Our client turned to me with a look of mingled desperation and defiance. "Doctor, I should have doubted myself as you do, were it not for this," he said, producing a folded sheet of newsprint from his coat pocket. It was a crude sketch from the Whitby Gazette depicting a man unmistakably resembling Sir Reginald, his face contorted in a snarl, fleeing a burning barn. The caption beneath read, "Blackthorn Fiend Strikes Again." Holmes, meanwhile, had risen silently and begun circling Sir Reginald like a hawk, his eyes darting from the man's mud-cake boots to the faint yellowish stain upon his gloves. Abruptly, he plucked the right glove from the baronet's hand and held it to his nose. "Opium," he declared, his tone sharp, of a peculiarly acrid variety smoked in the dens of Limehouse. "Curious habits for a gentleman lately returned from India. Perhaps the tan upon your wrists suggests recent exposure to tropical sun, though your face has since paled as for your boots here." Holmes seized one foot and tilted it upward, revealing a clump of frettish soil clinging to the heel. Now this is the distinctive Ferris clay of the Yorkshire moors, still damp from yesterday's rain. You have ridden hard to reach us, Sir Reginald, your horse. I perceive is tethered downstairs, its left forleg favoring a stone bruise. The baronet gaped. This is witchcraft, Mr. Holmes, he exclaimed, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Merely observation, Holmes said coolly, but let us return to your other. Self. Has this double-spoken left any tangible evidence beyond hearsay? Tangible enough, Sir Reginald, exclaimed, his voice rising. He produced a handkerchief from his sleeve, unfurling it to reveal a pearl create pin, its tip stained brown. This was found. Clutched in Briggs' hand, he explained, his voice trembling. It is mine, a gift from my late father. Yet I swear upon my mother's grave it was locked in my dressing case when the murder occurred. Holmes took the pin, examining it through his lens. The blood is recent, he said, matter-of-factly. You have, of course, the key to this case, or my person at all times, Sir Reginald replied firmly. My mother, Lady Eugenia, dismisses these events as fancy, Mr. Holmes, Sir Reginald said bitterly. But it tell you this phantom wears my face, haunts my halls, and means to see me hanged at this. Holmes's gaze sharpened. How singular that she does not join you in seeking aid, he remarked, his tone cutting. But no matter. You wish me to unmask this phantom before he succeeds in stealing my life entirely. Already the magistrate mutters about arrest if another sighting occurs. Holmes held up a hand. I shall wire Inspector Lestrade to delay any hasty conclusions, he said firmly. We depart for Yorkshire on the evening train. What's if you would be so good as to pack your service revolver as our... A client sagged in relief. I drew Holmes aside. Surely you don't credit this doppelganger nonsense. The man is clearly unhinged, I said in a low voice. Observe, Watson, Holmes murmured, plucking a single white hair from the back of Sir Reginald's coat, lamb's wool from Aladdin's shawl. Unless I mistake my textiles, our baronet has been embraced recently, and fervently, by a woman in mourning. Yet he wears no wedding band. Curious, is it not? But the opium. I began, trying to press my doubts. Ah, there we have the key, Holmes interrupted, his tone sharp with certainty. The glove's odor is unmistakable, yet Sir Reginald's pupils show no sign of habitual use. The opium is not his, Watson, but someone's. A shadow is moving through Blackthorn Manor, a shadow with a face, and faces, as you know, are my specialty with that. He turned to our client, who sat staring into the fire as though glimpsing his own funeral. Within its flames, courage, Sir Reginald. Holmes said, his tone almost reassuring. Phantoms fear the light of reason above all things. We shall illuminate yours. As the clock struck 4. The wind moaned down the chimney, and I found myself wondering whether it was indeed the weather that chilled me, or the slow cold smile that had crept onto Sherlock Holmes's face, the smile that heralded the opening moves of a deadly game before departing for Yorkshire. Sir Reginald's horse, injured from the hard ride to Baker Street, was left tethered below, in Mrs. Hudson's care, a small sacrifice for the sake of urgency and the unfolding mystery ahead. The Yorkshire moors, when we reached them by the evening train, lay sed in a brooding twilight that seemed to leach the very color from the world. The journey had been a silent one, Sir Reginald Blackthorne staring fixedly out the carriage window, as though the clatter of the rails might drown the specters haunting his mind. Sherlock Holmes, meanwhile, had buried himself in a sheath of maps and local histories, his keen eyes darting over faded ink like a hound following a scent. Only when the jagged silhouette of Blackthorn Manor pierced the horizon did he stir his gaze, locking upon our client's suddenly ashen face. You have not resided here since boyhood, I think Holmes remarked, not as a question but a statement. Sir Reginald started. How could you know that, he asked, his voice tinged with astonishment. The way your fingers tighten on your knee at the sight of those battlements, the reflexive swallow, the dilation of the pupils, Holmes said evenly. These are not the signs of homecoming, but of confrontation with a place of old dread. Our client's laugh held no mirth. You see through men, us others see through glass. Mr. Holmes, he said bitterly. Yes, I was. Sent to boarding school at 8, my father passed away, and I self-returned. The carriage lurched. As we turned onto a narrow lane, the manor's crooked towers now looming above us like rotten teeth. A bitter wind keened across the heath, carrying the faint iron tang of peat and decay. Even then I sensed a hostility in the land itself, the shadows pooling thickly about our wheels, the gnarled hawthorns claying at the carriage. As though the moors sought to repel our intrusion, we were met at the door by a woman who might have been a figure from some Gothic romance, pale as parchment, draped in a gown of unrelenting black, her silvered hair coiled tightly as a shroud about her skull lady. Eugenia Blackthorne's eyes, however, burned with an intensity that bellied. Her fragile frame, Reginald, she said, her voice a rustle of dry leaves. You bring strangers to our threshold at our most unconventional. Holmes swept his hat from his head with a courtly bow. Your son's need is urgent, madam, he said politely. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We come to shed light where shadows gather. Her knuckles whitened on the door. Frame, there are no shadows here but those cast by nervous minds. Come in then, if you must, she said. The manna's interior proved as cheerless as its mistress. Our boots echoed through vaulted halls, hung with moth-eaten tapestries past suits of armor, whose empty visors seemed to track our progress. A fire had been lit in the great hall, but its feeble glow only emphasized the chill creeping from the stone walls. It was during this dismal tour that I made my discovery. Pausing in a long gallery lined with ancestral portraits, I noticed a piecey peculiarity that stirred both my antiquarian interests and my sense of unease. One massive oil painting dominated the wall, a stern-bearded patriarch in Elizabethan ruff, his hand resting on the hilt of a sword. Beneath it hung a smaller, badly damaged canvas, its edges charred as though rescued from a fire. The subject appeared to be a boy of perhaps 12, his features eerily familiar. The founder of the Blackthorn line, Sir Reginald, muttered, noting my interest. A pirate, they say, who built this house with blood money in this? I asked, pointing to the scorched painting. Our client's face went slack. I don't recall, he stammered. Edgar, 1865. Holmes read aloud, producing a magnifying glass to examine the crumbling pigment. A relation lady, Eugenia, materialized at our elbows like a wraith. Her breath quick, a servant's child, she said, dismissively. The portrait was damaged in a nursery fire long ago. It should have been destroyed, yet here it remains. Holmes mused, tracing the boy's jawline with his lens, curious that the flames spared the face. One might almost think a crash from the hallway shattered the moment a housemaid stood trembling amid shards of a fallen candelabra, her eyes wide. A source's, I'm that. Sorry, meaty, only I thought I saw. She began, haltingly staring at Sir Reginald with undisguised terror. Holmes was upon her in 3 strides. So what, girl? He asked sharply. Him, sir, standing right there in the passage, but when I turned he weren't there no more, she exclaimed, trembling, looking toward Sir Reginald. Our hosts? Brandy glass shattered against the hearth lies. I've been here all the while, he cried indignantly. Peace, regional lady, Eugenia commanded, though her own hands flattered like wounded birds. The child is clearly overwrought. Mr. Holmes, you must excuse midnight, Holmes announced abruptly. Consulting his watch, the witching approaches. Watson, let us see what phantoms this house conjures. When honest men are bed, the housemaid deposited us in separate chambers, connected by a warped oak door, mine scarcely furnished save for a sagging bed, and washed and pocked with mildew through the thin wall. I heard Holmes pacing his room, still fully dressed. I noted his shadow occasionally blotting. The sliver of light beneath our shared threshold told. The scream came as the clock struck 12, a shrill animal sound that brought us all bolt upright. In our beds, Holmes, fully dressed, was at my door before the echoes faded. The stables, he snapped urgently. Snatching up his stick, we found the maid Molly collapsed in the courtyard, her face blanched. By moonlight it was him, she sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Sir Reginald, who arrived moments later, clutching a dressing gown about him. I saw his face, plain as day, at the vestibule door. Then he vanished like smoke, she exclaimed. Holmes dropped to one knee, examining the mud. 2 sets of footprints, the girl's and a man's, in riding boots, he said firmly. His lantern beam caught Reginald's slippered feet. Yours, sir, this here the only boots I own, our client cried, near hysterical. Now yet here we have a perfect imprint. Holmes murmured, measuring the tread with his tape size. 11, I should say, with a distinctive crack across the left heel. Tell me, Lady Eugenia, does the manor keep a guest register? The old woman drew herself up, her voice trembling with forced composure. We are not in the habit of entertaining Mr. Holmes. Now, if you will excuse me, I must attend to this poor child, she said dismissively as she led the weeping maid inside. Holmes turned to me, his eyes gleaming with that cold intellectual fire. I knew soul mark the bootprint, Watson. Our phantom leaves tangible traces, and where there are traces, there's a trail. I finished precisely, but to what end, he murmured, staring up at the manor's brooding bulk, where a single light now burned in an upper window. Twice in one night the double appears, yet always beyond reach. We are being tested, old friend, and I mean to pass. Holmes knelt to examine the disturbed gravel, his lens glinting in the lamplight. A child could see these marks. Led east, Watson, he murmured. But observe the spacing betrays a deliberate, leisurely stride our phantom wants pursuit. He rose, brushing Moran grit from his coat, to chase him now would scatter the game. Better to study the board and await his next move. As we retired, I glimpsed Holmes pause before the gallery's burnt portrait, his fingers brushing the date 1865. A boy preserved in ashes, he murmured. How very telling. The wind rose to a shriek as I finally sought my bed, carrying with it the distant cry of a hunting owl's sleep. When it came was fitful, haunted by the image of a face that was and was not as Reginald's, a face peering from the shadows with a smile off terrible kinship. Chapter 2, From Tower to Inferno. Dawn broke over Blackthorn Man, as sullen and leaden as the mood that had settled upon its inhabitants. The night's disturbances had left nerves frayed and tempers short yet. It was not until mid-morning that the full horror of our situation revealed itself. I had joined Holmes in the breakfast room where he sat, ignoring a plate of kidneys in favor of scrutinizing a map of the estate, when a pallid footman appeared in the doorway, his voice trembling with barely contained panic. The clock tower says old Jem, they found him. He stammered, his face pale as parchment. We discovered the groundskeeper suspended from the tower's rusted bell chain, his work boots dangling 6 feet above the cobbles. The man's weathered face, grotesquely purpled, bore an expression of profound astonishment, as though death had arrived. In some unimaginable guise, Holmes cut the body down with clinical efficiency, his keen eyes missing no detail, the absence of ligature marks on the beam, the faint odor of lavender clinging to the corpse's shirt, the peculiar angle of the right arm, bent behind the back. Suicide, clearly declared a red-faced constable who had come puffing up. The stairs. Poor devil couldn't take the hauntings no more, he said, gruffly. Suicide. Holmes's voice cut like a scalpel. Observe the knees uncuffed, though the tower stairs are thick with grime. Note the distribution of lividity. Most tellingly, he pried open the dead man's left hand, revealing a crumpled slip of paper. The air returns. I read aloud the words, sparking a visible tremor in Sir Reginald, who stood clutching the doorframe, his face ashen. Preposterous. Lady Eugenia's voice rang from below, though she did not ascend the stairs. Jem was half mad with rheumatism. And drink burn that nonsense, she demanded, her tone resolute but quivering slightly. Holmes slipped the note into his pocketbook. Madam, I shall treat it with all the respect it deserves, he said sharply. Watson, be so good as to examine the body. My medical assessment only deepened the mystery. No signs of struggle, I said. Firmly, death by asphyxiation, but the hyoid bone is intact. This was no simple hanging indeed. Not, Holmes murmured, crouching to examine the dead man's boots. These marks here, 3 parallel grooves on the left heel. You'll find their match on the 3rd stair, he said, pointing downward. Sir Reginald moaned softly. First Briggs, now Jem. He means to isolate me entirely, he said, his voice trembling with despair. Hey, Sir Holmes wheeled it on our client, his eyes narrowing. You sound certain of your phantom's gender, he said inquisitively. Before the baronet could reply, a commotion erupted in the courtyard. A burly farmer in mud-spattered gaiters was arguing with 2 footmen. His broad face, flushed with either rage or fear, saw him plain as day. The man bellowed as we approached, black coat flapping. like a crow's wings riding hell for leather across Miller's Field at dawn. He jabbed a thick finger at Sir Reginald. His face, his black mare and the devil's own grin on him, he exclaimed, angrily. Our client staggered as though struck. I was A.B. Bed, until— Knowing my valley can attest, he said desperately. Attest what precisely? Holmes's interruptions. Islands the G gathering come. Let us establish facts. Mr. Crocker the farmer growled, and I'll swear on my mother's Bible what I saw. Which direction was this rider traveling? Holmes asked. East toward Grimsdyke Hollow. Coser replied gruffly. Holmes turned to Sir Reginald's valet, a pinch-faced fellow hovering at the periphery. You attended your master this morning? Holmes asked pointedly, for from Sir Broad his shaving. Water laid out his clothes, the valet replied nervously. Did you observe him at all times? Holmes pressed. The servant hesitated. I stepped out to fetch fresh towels at 8, perhaps 5 minutes, admitted reluctantly. Sufficient. Holmes said with a wolfish smile. What's on your watch? He called briskly. What followed was one of those Brora demonstrations of deduction that cemented Holmes's reputation, posting constables at every visible exit. He commandeered a lantern and led our reluctant party through the manor's labyrinthine passages, observed he intoned, holding the lantern aloft in the clock tower. At 7:55 a. Do Mr. Crocker here spots a rider 3 east to reach that spot from the Manorin. 10 minutes would require a speed of 18 min/ph, a gallop feasible for Surreal May was. She not kept securely stabled, he explained methodically. He paused, allowing the implication. To settle, but suppose our phantom knew a shortcut, with theatrical flourish. Holmes pressed a concealed panel in the tower wall. A section of Wayne's cutting slid aside, revealing a narrow stairwell reeking of damp constructed during the Civil War. I believe it emerges at the old ice house, lady, Eugenia finished tonelessly. She stood framed in the doorway, her black gown blending with the shadows, a childish fancy, long sealed, shedded faintly, yet recently reopened. Holmes counted. Illuminating. Fresh scrape marks. On the stone steps. Shall we test my theory? He suggested. The experiment proved killing in its precision, with Crocker stationed at Miller Field and myself timing the proceedings. Holmes vanished into the passage in precisely 9 minutes and 43 seconds. A cry went up from the farmer. A black-coated figure had appeared at the hollow's edge, only to vanish again. When Holmes reappeared in the tower, barely winded, even the constable gaped in awe. The killer, Holmes concluded, brushing dust from his sleeves, requires intimate knowledge of both the house's secrets and the surrounding land. Our phantom is no spirit but flesh and blood, and likely watching us this very moment, he said, gravely, as the others dispersed. I drew Holmes aside. You place Sir Reginald in grave danger with such pronouncements, I said, my voice low. On the contrary, uncertainty is the true danger. Our client nerves holes, replied Cotley. His nerves, Holmes? The man jumps at his own shadow. What if these delusions of a double mask some fracture of the mind? I argued. My friend fixed me with that piercing gaze. Do you truly believe him capable of such intricate deception? He asked. I've seen battle fatigue twist betterment, I said thoughtfully. Then observe more closely. Holmes produced the charred portrait fragment from his pocket. Edgar, 1865. A child who would now be, let us see, 38, Sir Reginald's exact age. Our phantom's face requires no mirror. Watson, it is etched here in oils and ash. He stated. A sudden clatter from the gallery above froze us. Both Holmes sprinted up the stairs, but found only a displaced suit of armor and a single white rose lying beneath the burnt painting, its petals still dewy with sap, a calling card. Holmes murmured, twirling the bloom beneath his nose. The same variety. Grows in Lady Eugenia's private garden. How singular, he noted that night as wind rattled the casements. I took up vigil in my room, revolver close at hand. Sleep, when it came, brought troubled dreams of identical faces laughing in smoke, until a hand shook me awake. Holmes stood over me, his face lit by urgent excitement. The portrait, Watson, the date. It's wrong, he exclaimed. But before he could explain, a woman's scream tore through the house, a sound that propelled us both into the darkened hall where fresh horrors awaited the scream that tore through Blackthorn Manor's corridors that night. Led us not to some fresh horror, but to the library, where Lady Eugenia stood rigid before a gaping hole in the wainscoting, a hidden compartment pried. Open with brutal haste lay bare its secrets a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, and a locket containing a miniature of a woman whose features mirrored Sir Reginald's own. Holmes, ever swift to seize upon evidence, snatched the journal and flipped to an entry dated July 12th, 1855, reading aloud in tones that cut through the shadows like a blade. My dearest Eleanor perished this night, leaving me a son whose visage bears the mark of her final agony. The physicians insist the child is unfit to live, his mind as fractured as the vial of linum that slipped from her hand. I've ordered him sent to St. Crispin's asylum, where God may show him mercy. I cannot, sir. Reginald, his face ashen, staggered into a chair. Elena, she was my stepmother, but father always said, he began, his voice trailing off, that she died of fever when you were a boy. Holmes finished, his eyes darting across the pages. A convenient fiction. Your stepmother perished in childbirth. This child, he tapped an entry dated 1865, Edgar, has been lost to fire. Let the record show I had but one son. Curious phrasing for a grieving father. Holmes remarked, his voice laden with suspicion. Lady Eugenia's breath came in shallow rasps. Lies, all lies, she muttered, her gaze fixed on the floor. Are they? Holmes produced the charred portrait from his pocket, holding it beside Sir Reginald's face. Twin pairs of storm-gray eyes stared back. A servant's child, you claimed, yet here we have a boy who shares not only the blackthorn brow, but the birthmark behind the right ear. A singular inheritance, would you not agree, Watson? I examined the painting's unburned portion, indisputably familial, I said firmly. Then I must away to London. Holmes announced abruptly, snapping the journal shut. The roots of this poison tree lie in St. Crispin's ashes. Watson, remain vigilant, our phantom grows impatient. 3 days later, Holmes returned in the guise of a grizzled seaman, his face smudged with cold dust, and his breath reeking of gin. I found him in the Manor's disused conservatory, scrubbing his hands with carbolic soaps. Crispin's burned in '78, he said without preamble, but its records have lived in the care of a certain Mr. Josiah Quigley, a former orderly now haunting Limhouse's opium dens. You spoke with him? I asked. Curiously persuaded him, Holmes corrected. Donning his frock coat, the man proved remarkably forthcoming. Once reminded of his military desertion charges, Edgar Blackthorne was indeed committed in 1855, diagnosed with moral insanity. But in 186-65, the asylum's fire provided convenient cover for his disappearance, he explained with a grim tone. Presumed dead, I murmured. Thoughtfully presumed absent. Quiggle recalled a gentleman paying handsomely to have the boy's corpse unrecorded. Our young Edgar resurfaced years later as a dockhand, boasting drunkenly of noble blood before vanishing again. Holmes paused, extracting a water-stained pamphlet from his satchel, an 1883 free broadsheet, advertising a traveling circus, a face circled in ink. Stopped my breath. The amazing Proteus, master of disguise, Edgar's tutelage in theatrical arts. Holmes said grimly. He honed his mimicry in carnival tents before returning to claim his birthright. But one question remains: who preserved his childhood portrait? Who kept the embers of his existence smoldering in this house? We found Lady Eugenia at her late husband's escritoire, quill scratching across the vellum. She did not look up as Holmes placed the burnt portrait before her. You knew, he said softly, knew your late husband's son lived, knew he would return. The quill snapped in her fingers. I protected my child. Reginald was but 3 when I wed his father. What mother would not fight for her son's inheritance? She retorted, her voice trembling with defiance, even by condemning Edgar to madness. Holmes asked, leaning closer. Madness, her laugh rang. Hollow. Edgar was a demon cradled in Alina's womb. At 6, he stabbed a maid with her own hatpin. At 10, he burned the nursery when the asylum took him. This house knew peace. For the first time in decades, she said bitterly. Holmes's gaze narrowed. Yet you preserved his image. Why? Tears splattered the parchment. His eyes, they followed me from the flames. I thought to keep it as proof should the day ever come. She whispered. Holmes stepped closer, his voice a blade. Come, Lady Eugenia, proof implies anticipation. You feared Edgar's return long before this night, he said incisively. The dowager's composure crumbled. He wrote to me after my husband's death. Threats failed as pleas, a son's rightful inheritance, he called it. I sent money, hoping to quiet him, she admitted, her voice breaking a crash. Echoed from below, followed by the acrid tang of burning oil. Holmes flung open the door. Your silence fed the fire. Madam, now it consumes. You, the east wing blazed like a pagan pea, flames licking at ancestral portraits through the smoke. A figure emerged, Sir Reginald's mirror. Image, laughing as he tossed a lit oil lamp into the library. Edgar Holmes roared, plunging after the vanishing shape. Chaos reigned, bucket lines formed and collapsed as timbers groaned. I dragged Sir Reginald from his bedchamber. The baronet screaming, "Let me die, he wants the house lit. Him have its bones." Holmes reappeared at door, worn his coat singed, clutching Ascrap. A velvet curtain. He fled into the he panted, but not before leaving this. The fabric bore a hastily scrolled message in phosphorescent paint, glowing faintly in the twilight. The air requires a crown, the game quickens. Watson, Holmes murmured, staring. At the moors, where mist coiled like waiting serpents, our adversary has played his childhood terrors against us. Now we must answer with the one weapon he lacks, brotherhood, as the household staggered through the ashes. I noted Holmes' pocket, a fragment of the circus broadsheet, his face etched with cold resolve somewhere beyond the scorched fields. A horse whined in the fog, a sound that might have been a challenge or aliment. Chapter 3. Chains of blood, chains of fate. The aftermath of the fire hung over Blackthorn Manor like a shroud, the acrid scent of charred timber permeating every drafty corridor. It was in this atmosphere of smoldering tension that Holmes convened a clandestine meeting in the estates, disused chapel, its stained glass, saints casting fractured hues over Sir Reginald's ashen face. The time has come, Holmes declared, placing a mahogany case upon the altar to let your phantom claim his prize. With the flourish of a stage magician, he revealed a waxen effigy, a death mask, of such chilling realism that I momentarily questioned whether our client's head had indeed been replaced. Sir Reginald recoiled, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the wax and effigy. That looks exactly like me, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Merely to simulate the condition, Holmes corrected in explaining. Meanwhile, Watson and I shall propagate rumors of your sudden demise through the village, a task made easier by your recent notoriety. The baronet's protestations were quelled by Holmes's icy logic. Holmes replied calmly, "Consider, sir, your adversary's entire design hinges upon becoming you what greater lure than an empty throne." 2 nights later, I found myself in the manor subterranean crypt, the effigy laid out in an open casket, its waxen face gleaming ped in the lantern light. Sir Reginald was safely hidden elsewhere, while his corpse, a wax and effigy, wore his signature emerald creat pin, the same baited relic found clasped in Briggs' dead hand above ground. Mrs. the Manor's head housemaid played the role of grieving housekeeper, her mournful wails echoing through the flue. Holmes had schooled her in the theatrics of loss, but her anguish needed no artifice. Her brother, the late groundskeeper Jem, had been Edgar's first victim. "The stage is set," Holmes whispered, concealing himself behind a marble effigy of some long dead Blackthorn. "Keep your revolver handy, Watson. Our phantom prefers knives, but desperation breeds improvisation." The hours crept by, marked by the drip of subterranean siege and the skittering of rat claws on stone. At Belfast midnight, the iron door creaked ajar. Foots echoed a measured tread that paused by the casket. Moonlight through a high grate revealed Sir Reginald's face, peering down at its waxen twin, a Cruar's smile twisting familiar feature as sleep. "Well, brother," came a voice both alien and intimate, as the figure leaned over the casket, his hands trembling slightly as he touched the create pin on the fig's chest. Inspecting it with suspicion, I cocked my revolver. The attack was swift, a pantherine pounce onto the effigy, Edgar's hands pressing against its chest and face in a desperate attempt to confirm its authenticity. As the wax head shifted slightly under his touch, Holmes sprang from the shadow's walking stick, connecting with the ascent wrist in a crack of bone checkmate. "Mr. Edgar Blackthorne," Holmes exclaimed, his voice cold and cutting. The ensuing struggle was brief, but savage. Our adversary fought with the feral strength of the damned teeth snapping at Holmes's forearm, until my pistol barrel pressed against his temple, stilled him a convincing likeness. Holmes remarked, pinning the man's arms, but even Proteus must breathe with a violent wrench. He tore away a latex nose and cheek pieces, revealing a face that drew gasps from the crypt's new arrivals, Sir Reginald and Lady Eugenia, supported by another housemaid, Edgar, the old woman whispered, collapsing against a sarcophagus. "Oh, God, what have I done?" she sobbed faintly. The captive threw back his head and laughed a sound like shattering glass. "Mother finally speaks. Truth, tell them how you paid the asylum keepers to forget me?" he demanded, his tone venomous. Holmes tightened his grip. "Your extortion failed, sir. Lady Eugenia's ledgers show regular withdrawals since 1880. Conscience money or blackmail?" he asked icily. "Blood money." Edgar spat shet-hot to buy my silence, "But I've come for my birthright." Sir Reginald staggered forward, tears streaming down his face, his expression crumbling under the weight of their revelations. "All this because father wronged you?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Wronged me?" Edgar's voice rose to a shriek. "I was firstborn, the true heir, while you dined on silver. I ate rats in St. Crispin's cellar, while you learned the quadrille. I learned which arteries bleed longest." He lunged against Holmes's hold, eyes wild. "This house is mine by right of suffering." It was then that Lady Eugenia's confession spilled forth, a torrent of guilt and fear. How Edgar's letters began arriving after her husband's death, threatening exposure. How she'd sent money hoping to plate him. How the fire at St. Crispin's had been no accident, but a youth's first act of as son. "I sought to protect Reginald," she quavered, clutching her rosary top, "preserve his inheritance by preserving me." Edgar sneered. "Dear stepmom knew. I lived that portrait she accidentally saved." His laughter echoed through the vaults, a reminder. "That madness runs in the blood." Holmes stepped between Edgar and the cowering Lady Eugenia, his voice still wrapped in velvet. "Madness is a poor alibi for malice, sir. Your theater of cruelty closes tonight with a practice twist," he secured. Edgar's wrists in irons retrieved from the crypt wall. "The constables come within the hour. Until then you may contemplate which face you'll wear to the gallows, the wronged heir or the common cutthroat." As the captive spat curses, Holmes turned to Watson, his eyes flinty. "Observe the restraints, Doctor. Note the craftsmanship these shackles held. Blackthorn pirates in the age of Elizabeth fitting, is it not, that they now cage their descendant?" As constables led the raving impostor away, Holmes retrieved a curious object from the crypt floor. A circus ticket stub dated 1879, night's edges singed. "The final touch," he murmured. "No actor discards his playbills." Sir Reginald stared at the effigy ruined face. "Will he hang? The law demands it." Holmes replied simply. "And what does justice demand, Mr. Holmes?" asked Reginald, his voice low. For once the great detective had no answer. Dawn found us in the Manor's gunroom, cataloging Edgar's array of disguise wigs of varying hue, spirit gum, a customer ledger from Madame Tussauds. Holmes paused at a child's primer, its flyleaf inscribed to Edgar from Mama. Observed the handwriting, he noted, comparing it to Lady Eugenia's letters. The same angular M she visited him, taught him even as she plotted his erasure, a tortured conscience. "I ventured o'er insurance." Holmes's face hardened. "She preserved that portrait not from guilt, Watson, but as leverage. Edgar was always her son's shadow, a weapon to be deployed should Reginald prove unsatisfactory." He paused, his tone growing sharper, "and yet Lady Eugenia's actions are far from just. Mark my words, Watson, after we are done dealing with Edgar, she will face the justice she has long evaded." A shrill arrival interrupted us, the hurried steps of a maid echoing through the hall. She burst into the room, her face pale and her voice trembling. "St. Holmes," she cried. "It's Edgar Blackthorne. He's escaped, overpowered a guard, they said, and was last seen heading toward Highmore Tea. But the chains, I said, were no match for a man raised in asylum irons." Holmes finished, already stree in toward the gunroom, His lifetime in shackles taught him more than poetry. Watson Holmes's expression darkened as he turned to the maid. Her words hanging in the air like aspector, the Moors, he said coldly, will claim what the law could not somewhere beyond the blinded panes. A kuru cry pierced the night, a sound uncannily like Edgar's laughter. The shrill cry of this whistle pierced the damp Yorkshire, night-rousing holes and me from uneasy slumber in the manors. Guest chambers. Through the mullen windows we glimpsed constables' lanterns bobbing like fireflies across the courtyard, their beams illuminating the sprawled form of a young officer clutching his bloody temple. "The game is afoot," Watson Holmes exclaimed, throwing open the window as a ruche of damp Miranda air swept into the room, carrying the sharp tang of impending rain below. Lad's voice bellowed furiously. "He's escaped with Jarvis's pistol. That devil broke his shackles." We hurried to the great hall where we found Sir Reginald pacing in agitation, his dressing gown hanging loosely over his shoulders. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the empty portrait frame, where Edgar's likeness had once loomed. "This is my doing," he muttered, his voice heavy with regret. "The blood calls to blood." Holmes scarcely paused to don his Ulster sentiment later. "Action now, Watson. Fetch my field glass and the bull's-eye lantern, sir. Reginald, rouse your gamekeeper and the hounds." The pursuit began at the crumbling ruins of the old asylum, where Edgar's discarded shackles lay twisted. Beneath a toppled headstone, two brindle bloodhounds strat their leashes, their deep-throated banging echoing into the night. The gamekeeper, a grizzled veteran of the Afghan campaigns, knelt to inspect the disturbed ground, his practiced eye catching every detail. "He's heading for High Moor. Tour," the man growled, pointing to a snapped bracken frond, glistening with fresh sap. "It's the only shelter between here and the coast." Holmes crouched. Beside him, his magnifying lens catching the faint imprint of a bare foot in the moss. "Barefoot," he murmured, the man's scorn. Civilization to Thalast as if in answer. A pistol shot cracked through the pre-dawn glooms, sending a startled kuru skyward. The hounds surged forward, their howls mingling with the rising wind as we gave chase. The mow transformed under a shroud of thick clinging fog, spectral tendrils coiling about our ankles as we climbed the uneven terrain. Holmes LED our grim procession. The bull's-eye lantern strapped to his chest casting a feeble flickering beam through the MK behind us. Sir Reginald stumbled, his curses barely audible above the relentless howl of the wind. "Hold!" Holmes hissed suddenly, freezing us mid-stride. Through the spectral haze loomed the jagged crow of High Muti, its granite outcrops like teeth-ging at the low-scudding clouds. There, silhouetted against the weeping sky, stood Edgar. His borrowed constable's jacket flapped like a raven's wings, and the stolen revolver gleamed in his hand. "Come no closer," he shouted, his voice rising above the Galethi wind twisted his words into a haunting echo. "I'll not dance on Blackthorn's gallows." Holmes stepped forward with the cautious grace of a lion tamer, his hands raised in a gesture of calm. "Your grievance is with history, not these good men. Put down the firearm, and we shall debate your birthright over brandy and cigars." Edgar's hollow laughter rang out, bouncing off the stones like the nail of a bell debate. He sneered, "What use is rhetoric to the twice-born?" with a trembling hand. He tore open his shirt, revealing a livid scar seared into his chest. A crude bee burned into the flesh. "My father's brand." He spat. "He welcome when I came knocking at his grave, sir." Reginald clutched at my arm, his voice sore whisper, "The mellum fire last winter." "Silence, usurper," Edgar snarled, leveling the pistol at his half-brother. "This tea has seen Blackthorn blood spilled before the old ones demand their tithe as the hammer." Cocked Holmes's hand dipped into his pocket. "Then let us pay in kind," he declared with a conjurer flourish. He hurled the bull's-eye lantern high into the air. The sudden flare illuminated the moor in a burst of blinding light, piercing the fog and stunning our quarry. In that frozen instant I charged, adrenaline propelling me forward. My years of service surged to life as I collided with Edgar, sending us both tumbling across the rain-slicked stone. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the heather, and we grappled in the mud. "The name dies with me." Edgar rasped, his teeth snapping perilously close to my neck. A glint of steel caught my eye. The ancestral dagger from the manor's hall. its obsidian hilt etched with pagan runes. Holmes's cane descended like a thunderbolt, striking Edgar's wrist with unerring precision. The blade clattered to the ground, spinning into the void as we struggled. Near the T's crumbling edge below us, the fog parted, momentarily revealing the jagged rocks waiting below. "Yield," Holmes commanded, pinning Edgar's thrashing form with a strength of grim determination. Edgar's laughter curdled the mist. "You cannot kill. A ghost, Mr. Holmes. I am the first son, the true." His defiance ended in a wet gasp as Sir Reginald lunged from the shadow's fists. "Flying murderer, defiler," he roared, his voice roar with anguish. The brothers toppled, a snarling tangle of shared blood and, mutual hatred, Holmes, and I dragged them apart, but not before Edgar's temple struck an outcrop with a sickening crunch. "Watson," the field dressing Holmes barked. I knelt in the heather, my hand steady despite the chaos, and staunched the bleeding wound. As Holmes administered smelling salts, Edgar's eyes fluttered open briefly. His gaze unfocused but landing on Sir Reginald's tear-streaked face, father's first, he gurgled before slipping into unconsciousness. Lestrade and his constables arrived moments later, bearing Edgar away on a stretcher, his wrists shackled to the frame despite his limp state. "York Prison's infirmary will mend that skull," Lestrade growled, "and its cells will hold what the moors could not." Dawn broke, sullen and gray as wet ascended. From the tour, our grim burden in tow at the edge of the mall, Holmes paused, his eyes fixed on the dagger he had recovered from the tour's base observe. "The inscription," he murmured, tracing the eroded Norse runes with a gloved finger. "Blood binds, blood blinds. A family motto," I ventured a warning. Holmes replied, his gaze lingering on the tour where ravens now circled. "The Blackthorn curse was never spectral. Watson, merely the eternal return of sins long buried." As we trudged back to the man, the first drops of rain began to fall, washing away the blood that stained Sir Reginald's clenched fists. Chapter 4. The Hollow Crown of Blackthorn. The morning after Edgar's capture dawned with a brittle clarity. Sunlight piercing Blackthorn Manor's leaded windows, like shards of glass. Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves once more in the Manor's oak-paneled library, where mows of dust swirled in the amber light as though the very air hummed with the weight of unresolved truths. A squat frog-faced solicitor named Mr. Throckmorton had arrived from York, his battered dispatch box clutched like a holy reliquary, its contents poised to unravel. The Blackthorn lineage's darkest secret. "I understand there's been some dispute regarding succession," the man wheezed, mopping his brow with a PW handkerchief from the shadows. Lady Eugenia emitted a stifled SOB, her black crepe veil trembling. Holmes store the mantelpiece, his finger tracing a fissure in the carved overmantel. "Your firm handled the late Lord Blackthorn's affairs, did it not? Including the disposition of his first marriage." Throckmorton's jowls quivered. "I am bound by client confidential reality, bound tighter by the hangman's noose." Holmes's voice cracked like a whip. He depressed a hidden catch in the woodwork, releasing a panel beneath the hearthstone from the cavity. He withdrew, a parchment scroll sealed with crumbling crimson wax, a will dated 1865, concealed behind a false brick in the chimney. "How came you to overlook it during probate?" The solicitor turned corpse gray. "That document is inoperative, is it?" Holmes cracked the seal with surgical precision. "Behold Lord Aller Blackthorn's final testament, acknowledging Edgar as legitimate heirborn of his lawful wife Eleanor, née Voss." He passed the document to Sir Reginald, whose hands shook as he read aloud, "To my firstborn son, Edgar Aller Blackthorn, I bequeath title lands and entailed properties." Lady Eugenia's cane clattered against the floorboards. A dead letter. The boy was declared mad. His rights forfeit. By whose hand? Holmes pinned her. With a hawk's gaze, the Court of Chancery never ruled on competence. You and your husband merely let the world forget. Throckmorton squirmed. Technically, the entail remains valid, however. Holmes interjected. No court in England would award estates to a murderer. Legal legitimacy cannot cleanse blood-stained hands. He fixed Sir Reginald with a look of grim compassion. The title is yours, sir, but the victory comes at a heavy cost. At dusk, we found Lady Eugenia in the chapel crypt, kneeling before the Blackthorn morsum. The scent of extinguished candles clung to the chill air. I shall take the veil at St. Hilda's, she murmured without turning. The sisters. Welcome, penitent. Sir Reginald reached toward her, then let his hand fall. Mother, I don't deserve to be called your mother, she said, her voice heavy with remorse. I have killed Edgar in every way. That matters. I destroyed him. Holmes cleared his throat. The stable hands murder. Edgar's left-handed thrust, was it not? The wound's downward angle betrayed him. She nodded absently. He favored his left even as a child. I burned his left-handed glove, tried to beat it out of him. A spectral smile twisted her lips. Some curses persist. Later in the study, Holmes assembled his final proofs upon a claw-footed table. The dagger from the tour, Edgar's circus broadsheet, and a pair of gloves mismatched by handedness. Observe, Watson, he said, positioning 2 wax tapers to cast opposing shadows. Briggs' mortal wound descended sharply from right colon to left rib, a trajectory impossible for a right-handed man of Sir Reginald's height, only a left-handed as Salant standing on the haft. Ladder could strike. Thus I examined his diagram. But the magistrate never noted this because rural constabularies measure guilt by resemblance, not reason. Yet the truth lingered in plain sight like Lady Eugenia's portrait, or that telltale boot, print with its cracked heel. Sir Reginald entered bearing a decanter of ancient brandy. His eyes lingered on the dagger. He hated me before we met. Is that possible? Hate requires no introduction. Holmes replied softly, merely a narrative your mother provided. That in abundance at dawn's first light we stood at the manor gates as a nun's carriage bore Lady Eugenia into the mist. Sir Reginald watched until the vehicle vanished, then pressed a velvet pouch into Holmes's hand. The blackthorn emeralds, your fee, said Reginald. Holmes recoiled as though offered poison. Keep your jewels, sir. This house is bed enough in human flesh. As our train pulled from the station, I glimpsed Sir Reginald through the window, a solitary figure before the charred east wing, head bowed beneath the weight of empty victory. A tragedy of Greek proportions. Amused, Holmes stared at the receding moors and said, more Shakespearean. You think the sins of the father visited upon sons both true and false. He then drew Edgar's primer. From his coat, its pages falling open to a childish scroll. Papa comes tomorrow. The words hung between us as the engine's whistle mourned across the heath, a requiem for brothers unborn and battles unwon. The Yorkshire moors lay behind us, swallowed by the creeping mist as our train clattered southward toward London. Sherlock Holmes sat motion in the compartment corner, his profile etched against the grimy window eyes fixed on the fading horizon where Blackthorn Manor's jagged silhouette had once loomed. I watched him, this man of steel springs and precision, and marveled at the unspoken weight that now seemed to bow his hawkish frame, a singular case. Watson, he remarked abruptly, as though plucking the thought from the damp air. 2 faces, one soul or none at all. I stirred from my rye. You uncovered the truth holes. Justice, however bitter, prevails, I said, attempting to reassure him. Justice. His laugh was a dry rasp. We have merely swept the stage for the next Aki. Heredity is a playwright who never discards a manuscript, he replied. He drew Edgar's charred primer from his coat, its brittle pages whispering secrets as he flipped them. Observe the marginalia, a child's hand tracing the blackthorn crest over and over. Not aspiration, Watson, recognition. The train plunged into a tunnel, plunging us into momentary darkness. When light returned, Holmes's face was a mask of shadow. What torments me, he murmured, is not the cruelty of the game, but its elegance. Edgar's entire existence, a perfect count point. To his brothers had their positions been reversed. The wheel's rhythmic clack filled his pause. I thought of Sir Reginald standing alone in his ravaged hall, heir to nothing but ghosts, and shivered. Baker Street welcomed us with drizzle in the warm glow of familiarity. Mrs. Hudson, bless her steadfast soul, met us at the door with a tray of lapsang souchong and a reproachful cluck at our mud-spattered boots. A message came an hour past, Mr. Holmes, she said, nodding toward the hall table where a folded note lay like an unquiet spirit marked urgent. The lad delivering it said, "It's bad news from Yorkshire." Holmes picked up the note, unfolding it with the precision of a surgeon. His sharp intake of breath told me all, Lestrade, he said, passing the paper. To me, Edgar Blackthorne found hanged in cell used buckle from stolen belt. Last words scrolled on wall. The face in the mirror was always his further instructions required. I read aloud, the weight of the message settling heavily in my chest. Madness. To the last I said, or clarity. Holmes moved to the fire, the edge of the note curling in the flames. Consider the phrasing, not my face, but the face, as though he finally recognized the mask beneath the skin. The clock's pendulum swung its metronomic beat as Holmes sank into his armchair, steepling his fingers outside a newsboy cry. Suicide in Yorkshire drifted through the fog. You anticipated this, I ventured. I anticipated resolution. He said, his voice holding an uncharacteristic edge, yet the final stroke eludes me still. Why that phrase? Why the mirror? I recalled the gauntlet of portraits in Blackthorne's gallery, generations of gray eyes staring through time. Perhaps he saw his father's cruelty in every reflection, his own Sir Reginald's, or recognize the cruelest truth of all, that he and his brother were mere facets of the same cursed stone. Holmes said, plucking his violin from its case. The bow hovering over Thestrings, the Moors keep their secrets, Watson. But not from us. A discordant note shivered through the room as he played a gypsy air, mournful and unresolved. I watched the note's ashes skirl in the great Edgar's final words reduced to smoke and conjecture. Later, as I chronicled these events, I paused at the question Holmes left hanging in the air, like the man himself. Can a life forged in betrayal ever reflect anything but distortion? The looking glass shows what it is shown. Yet Edgar's last act twisted even this truth. We never learned which brother's face he saw in the end. Holmes, ever pragmatic, dismissed the case as a trifle of mirrors and morphine. Yet I noted he kept Edgar's burnt portrait pinned above his desk. One fog-draped evening, as we sat by the fire, I remarked on its presence. Holmes merely stirred his tea. A reminder, Watson, evil wears many faces but seldom its own. He said. The clock struck 12. The case was closed. It was some weeks after the case of the Blackthorne phantom had faded from the headlines, replaced by fresher scandals. But for me, its specters lingered still. Holmes, as ever, had buried himself in work, his sharp mind leaping from ciphers to chemical experiments with the agility of a cat at play. Yet I had seen the shadow in his eyes, the weight he carried, though he would never admit it. A letter arrived that evening. Its envelope plain salve for a Yorkshire postmark. Holmes, engrossed in a monograph on the uses of collar derivatives, handed it to me with a nod. No doubt from Sir Reginald, he remarked absently. Read it aloud. Watson, if you please, breaking the seal. I unfolded the single sheet and began to read. Dear Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson, I write to you with the heaviness of a man who has seen the world's worst shadows and the faint glimmers of light that pierce them. Blackthorne Manor is at last quiet. The east wing remains, a charred ruin, as it must always be, a fitting monument to the sins of my family. Yet in that silence I have found clarity. If not, peace, your deductions of unearthed truths. I dared not face my brother Edgar, though a stranger to me in life has become a haunting presence in my thoughts. I see him now not as the villain I once believed, but as a man shaped and broken by the choices of others. In his final days he wrote to me, though I was unaware until after his death, his letter found among his few belongings, eyes enclosed. I share it with you both, not out of duty, but out of something I cannot quite name. Perhaps a desire to understand or to be understood. I leave Blackthorne Manor tomorrow, bound for the continent, this house with all its grandeur. It has become a prison, yet I carry with me the hope that through distance and time, I might learn to live not as a Blackthorne but as a man. Yours in gratitude, Sir Reginald Blackthorne. I paused, the letter trembling in my hands. Holmes, who had laid down his monograph, gestured silently for me to read Edgar's letter. Its paper was crumpled, the ink smeared in places, but the words rang clear to my brother Reginald. Though I doubt you'll read this, I write it nonetheless. What is a man, if not Thestrings? He tells himself mine is a tale of fire and ash written by hands not my own. Yet as the end draws near, I see now that I have worn too many masks and forgotten my true face. You were the sunlit child, Reginald the heir. The favorite, I was the shadow. Cast by that light, shaped by the cold walls of St. Crispin's, the jeers of men who called me beast and devil, did I hate you for it at times. But more than hate, I envied you, not for your title or wealth, but for the love you were given so freely, the love. I could only imagine. The fire in the East Wing was my answer to a world that denied me. I burned the past, hoping to rise from its ashes. Yet in the end I see that fire consumes everything, even the hand that wields it. You know why I wore your face. It was not just revenge. It was a plea. I wanted you to see me not as the monster, but as the brother who might have been in that mirror. Perhaps we might have found each other. But mirrors are cruel things, they show only the surface, never the depths. My death will be my final performance. Do not weep for me, Reginald. My part was written long ago, and I have played it to its bitter end. But do not let it be the end of yours. Take the stage now and live as I could not farewell. Edgar. The room fell silent. As I finished outside, the London fog crept along Baker Street, muffling the sounds of the city. Holmes stared into the fire, his features etched, with an expression I could not quite place, a blend of sorrow, understanding, and something deeper, almost primal. At last, the truth, he murmured, his voice uncharacteristically soft, not in deductions or proofs, but in the heart of the matter. The man sought recognition. Watson, not wealth, not vengeance, only the acknowledgement of his existence. I sat back, the weight of the letter settling in my chest, and yet, came too late, I said, even as he reached out. He was already lost. Holes nodded, his gaze distant, a tragedy in every sense of the word. Edgar was both victim and villain, shaped by forces beyond his control, and Sir Reginald. He now bears the burden of survival, of understanding, that I think is the crest of the fire. The only sound at last. Holmes stirred, rising to retrieve a thin package from his desk drawer. Unwrapping it, he revealed the charred fragment of Edgar's childhood portrait. I kept this, he said, simply placing it on the mantel. Not as a reminder of the case, but of the faces we wear and the ones we hide. He turned to me, his expression inscrutable. Tell me, Watson, do you believe redemption is possible? Even in the shadow of such darkness, I considered the question, my thoughts returning to Edgar's letter to the tormented soul. It revealed, perhaps, I said, at last, if not in life, then in the memories of those who remain. Perhaps that is enough. Holmes inclined his head, his sharp features softened by the firelight, a comforting thought. My friend, he said, let us hope it is true, and with that he returned to his violin, drawing forth a mournful melody that echoed through the fog-bound streets. The notes lingered like ghosts, a requiem not only for Edgar Blackthorne, but for the brotherhood that might have been, and the shadows that will forever haunt the moors. Thank you for tuning in to Cafe Stories. If you enjoyed the intrigue and suspense, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more captivating detective adventures. Your support keeps the stories coming and the mysteries alive.